Good evening. On Sunday, November 22nd, 1987, just a few days before the American Thanksgiving holiday, Chicagoans gathered round their television sets to watch the 9 o'clock news on Channel 9. Channel 9 was, at the time, owned and operated by WGN, an independent local broadcast company that also operated a local radio station with a news format. At 9:14 p.m., the sports segment was interrupted and replaced by a poorly recorded videotape of a man disguised as Max Headroom, a fictional TV character who was, for a time, a sensation in both America and the United Kingdom. He was wearing a rubber mask, sunglasses, and a tan suit. For 17 seconds, Max bobbed up and down in front of a rotating corrugated metal panel, a prop that simulated the shifting lines that regularly provided a backdrop to Max Headroom's soliloquies on his television appearances. There was no audio transmission, save for a staticky buzz, and WGN engineers quickly regained control of the signal, bringing the feed back to the studio and leaving it to sports announcer Dan Rowan to explain what happened. Unfortunately, Rowan himself was as bewildered as his audience and could only sheepishly grin at the camera while blaming a station computer that took off and went wild. The rest of the newscast continued without incident. Yet only 2 hours later, our masked man struck again. His next target was public television station WTTW, better known as Channel 11, which was airing a late-night broadcast of Doctor Who's Horror of Fang Rock. This transmission was much more successful. For one thing, the audio worked. For another, the station had no engineers on duty at its transmitter site, located in the Sears Tower, about 12 miles away. WTTW's studio technicians tried and failed to regain control of the signal and were forced to watch helplessly as Max once again seized the airwaves using an electronically distorted voice to expound on a range of subjects. WGN was a particular target of his wrath, as was one of its radio station's sports announcers, Chuck Swirsky. Max also sang, moaned, complained about his piles, simulated defecation, brandished what reporters later euphemistically described as a marital aid, and for his grand finale, bent over a table while a woman in a dirndl flogged his bare buttocks with a fly swatter. Finally, after about 1:22 minutes, the transmission ended, and viewers were returned to the Horror of Fang Rock just in time to hear the doctor's next line, which was, "As far as I can tell, a massive electric shock. He must have died instantly." Channel 11's programming remained undisturbed for the rest of the evening. By the next morning, news of the hijacked signals had spread and for a brief period dominated local and national news cycles. Not only was the event shocking, it was also illegal. In the United States, the public airwaves are regulated at the federal level by the Federal Communications Commission, commonly referred to as the FCC. An FCC spokesman issued a stern warning to the perpetrators, noting that signal disruption was punishable by up to a year in jail, a fine of up to $100,000, or both. In addition, spokespersons for both stations assured the viewing public that steps had been taken to prevent this from ever happening again. Public sentiment on the matter ranged from amused to apoplectic. Fans of Doctor Who were particularly peeved as WTTW was their only source of the series, and they had lost close to 1.5 minutes of a precious episode. However, the media coverage and public bewilderment did not last long. 3 days after the incident and the day before Thanksgiving, Harold Washington, mayor of Chicago, died unexpectedly. Local journalists turned their focus toward local journalists turned their focus toward the ensuing public mourning, something that we Chicagoans do very thoroughly, and the antics of the city council in the wake of the succession. Excuse me. One moment. Checking on the feed. I don't know if anybody can see or hear me right now. I'm just checking to make sure I'm getting messages. All right, I will continue from where I left off, and we can just move forward if that's okay. Great. However, the media coverage and public bewilderment did not last long. 3 days after the incident and the day before Thanksgiving, Harold Washington, mayor of Chicago, died unexpectedly. Local journalists turned their focus toward the ensuing public mourning, something that we Chicagoans do very thoroughly, and the antics of the city council in the wake of a succession crisis. Still, the FCC launched an investigation and were joined by the FBI, which had access to more sophisticated technology. Dr. Michael Marcus, an FCC investigator with a history of success in tracking down broadcast pirates, initially took the lead on the case. The problem was that Marcus was in Washington, D.C., and the FCC's Chicago-based field agent seemed out of his depth. Much to Marcus's frustration, the Chicago-based agent refused to take any real action. Curiously, neither of the affected stations seemed inclined to launch its own investigation, nor did any of the city's media outlets. Eventually, the case went cold. The statute of limitations on prosecuting the case expired back in 1992, and no official suspect in the Max Headroom incident has ever been named. Had the interest in this case been relegated to media and law enforcement, the signal hijacking might have faded out of our collective cultural memory. That didn't happen, however, and public preoccupation with the case has only increased over the decades. A Google search using the term Max Headroom Incident in 2023, when I wrote the first version of this essay, called up 670,000 results. The case continues to be examined, written about, and debated in both legacy and online media. This continued fascination can be attributed to the hacker community, which maintained a keen interest in the case even after media furor died down. This motley crew of hackers and broadcast pirates and phone freakers regarded the signal disruption as a praiseworthy accomplishment and felt a strong sense of pride that one of their own had managed such a feat. These same geeks and hackers would go on to lay the foundation for the modern internet and its corresponding online culture. So it isn't surprising that the Max Headroom incident has continued to garner interest that has eclipsed even the initial media frenzy, continuing to attract the interest of many, including myself. I am neither a tech geek, hacker, a Max Headroom fan, nor am I a federal agent. However, the hackers' brazen audacity, inscrutable motives, perverse content, and continued silence continues to perturb me, often at inconvenient times. Therefore, I shall perturb all of you with my beliefs about the identities of the perpetrators, their motivations, the failure of both federal regulators and the media to pursue the case, and the possibility of this great mystery ever being solved. I will first skip ahead and address why the FCC, FBI and the media failed to pursue a broadcast signal intrusion against two stations within 2 hours in the third largest media market in the United States. My belief, shared by others, is that this was by design. The broadcast media industry colluded with federal agencies to bury the story, which was easy to do after Thanksgiving and the convenient death of the mayor, and let the investigation go cold in exchange for developing stronger protocols for protecting its signals. This collusion reflected embarrassment by broadcast executives and regulatory officials that such an intrusion was even possible. Continued widespread publicity of the case, along with public access to investigation details, might encourage other hackers to exploit vulnerabilities at other stations around the country. So the FCC and broadcasters may have felt it best to make the necessary security adjustments quietly. Secondly, I do not believe it is likely that the identity of Max and his lady accomplice will ever be discovered, short of one or both of them coming forward or someone discovering the original videotape of the incident among their possessions. The perpetrators took significant steps to cover their tracks and cloak their identities, making positive identification difficult. Most obviously, both Max and his lady wore masks during their performance, and Max's voice had been electronically manipulated. A few details about the physical appearance of each party can be gleaned from the video, such as their relative youth and body size, but not much else. Other clues in the case are related to the content and the mechanism of the signal interruption. Contrary to public perception, the powerful broadcast transmitters were not the hijacker's primary target. The WGN transmitter, located on top of the John Hancock building, and the WTTW transmitter at the Sears Tower were fed via microwave uplinks from each studio, which were both miles away from downtown. The pirate overwhelmed the much weaker microwave transmissions with his broadcast, which was then sent to the transmitters and beamed into the home of Chicago area residents. The ability of the perpetrators to do this does give some idea of the geographic location of Max and his equipment. Both stations were headquartered in North Side neighborhoods, WGN in North Center and WTTW in North Park, not terribly far from each other. The mechanism of microwave transmissions likely occurred from a tall building in the area. The fact that the lady accomplice was wearing a dirndl might also support this theory, as both North Center and North Park border Lincoln Square, then the epicenter of Chicago's German community. And for that matter, I would argue that a more productive line of investigation might have been to visit local German restaurants and bars to make discreet inquiries about their house uniforms for barmaids and waitresses. It may be that Max did, after spending all this money on the equipment, might not have wanted to invest in a more appropriate French maid's costume, or for that matter, a flogger, paddle, or riding crop. For his grand finale, instead of instructing his lady to make do, in this case, he just instructed his lady to make do with whatever she had around the house, which could have been her work uniform and a fly swatter. Another consideration is that the caper was completed in two parts. This was not a live stream, so the recording of the videotape took place first, and then the actual signal hack. The FCC's Dr. Marcus focused on the location of where the video might have been recorded, pointing to the corrugated metal background as indicative of the setting being in a specific kind of structure, such as a warehouse or a storage building, which might have doors or walls made of this kind of material. Marcus instructed his recalcitrant field agent to identify and investigate such buildings, and that did not happen. In this case, I do disagree with Dr. Marcus. The corrugated metal panel was not a fixed part of the building, but a prop that was suspended from the ceiling, which means that the video may well have been recorded in a home, apartment, or office, really making attempts at finding the location futile. Where I do agree with Dr. Marcus is in his assessment that the hack could as easily have been perpetrated by an amateur as a broadcast professional. Initially, many believed that this was an inside job, and there are still those today who argue that this was the case. Their reasoning was initially based on the faulty assumption that the broadcast transmitters were hacked. That didn't happen. But also on the idea that the equipment to disrupt even the microwave signals would have been too expensive for an amateur to afford. Dr. Marcus points out that while the equipment might have cost as much as $10,000 in 1987, that pricing was based on the cost of new equipment. It would have been much less on the secondhand market. I do also, however, reject the hacker versus professional binary. Many tech enthusiasts hold regular jobs in their industries while also having various hobby projects. And indeed, I do believe that the primary instigator of this incident was not a random hacker, but a professional broadcast engineer gone rogue. The successful signal intrusions, the nature of the audio content during the second intrusion, the decision to hijack WTTW's signal after the first short-circuited, and the choice of a Max Headroom disguise reinforces my theory. I believe that the motive for the signal hijack was likely professional in nature. If complaints about lax signal security had gone unheeded by Max's bosses, he might have been attempting one last attempt. He may have been working on one last attempt at getting their attention very seriously. The other possibility is simple disgruntlement with WGN, and WGN was the focus of his ire. There were multiple references to the station's call letters during a transmission that lasted only 82 seconds, beginning with Max expressing contempt for a WGN radio announcer, then making two separate references to Clutch Cargo, a rather freakish children's cartoon that had been a regular feature on WGN's long-running Garfield Goose and Friends television show. And finally, is mentioning Greatest World Newspaper Nerds, a reference to WGN's call letters, which stand for World's Greatest Newspaper, hearkening back to a time when the station was owned by the Chicago Tribune. The frequency and specificity of these remarks suggests that Max had an axe to grind. Another intriguing aspect of this case is his decision to launch the second transmission. Most followers of this incident agree that WGN was absolutely the original target. The question is why the hacker would repeat an intrusion on another network, increasing his risk of being caught. A prankster might have just dropped the project after his successful but brief disruption of WGN's signal, but a man on a mission has different priorities. I suspect that the pirate knew he was taking a gamble on the WGN transmission, hoping the engineers would be so stunned by the intrusion that it would take them a minute or two to respond effectively. While the hijacking was aborted after only 17 seconds, Max went to his plan B, choosing WTTW because, being a broadcasting insider, he knew that the Sears Tower transmitter was unstaffed, and this would allow him time to run the entire video. My final reason for believing that the hijacker was an industry professional is his choice of the Max Headroom persona. This fictional character was billed as the first computer-generated newscaster, a semi-autonomous CGI image powered by artificial intelligence. The source of the AI? A computer-generated copy of the mind of one Edison Carter, an investigative journalist operating in a dystopian society run by media oligarchs. Sound familiar? Max Headroom could move between television and computer screens, disrupting broadcasts and criticizing the practices of media companies and their sponsors. He and Edison Carter also allied with a couple living outside the regime, operating an unlicensed pirate television station. It is easy to see how a disgruntled media insider might find this persona attractive. In any case, the truth is out there, but for now, nobody is talking. As mentioned earlier, the statute of limitations expired decades ago, but it is a fair bet that a public admission could affect the hacker's career and would have affected his career. Had he been prosecuted or even exposed, his career would have been destroyed, particularly, and this would have been devastating, particularly in an era before streaming services, podcasts, and YouTube programming that would have made the skills of even a disgraced professional more in demand. He may also, it's also possible that he was trying to protect his female accomplice, may have been a wife or a girlfriend. She hasn't talked. She hasn't said anything. And it does appear that they were probably in their 20s, and they have not necessarily reached retirement age, and they may be waiting to do that before making a public confession. Even without, though, these threats, these two may just not want to become cultural antiheroes. Whether the truth is ever made known or not, this story continues to be told and enjoyed, providing us all with an enduring bridge between two very different media landscapes. Thank you.
Yeah, I didn't.
Lainie, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Right, so any questions? Stunned silence.
Can I just say I really enjoyed the spanking?
Even with a fly swatter? No flogger? Come on.
Have you seen the video of the actual incident? Is it on like YouTube or something?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's quite something. And there's even been some up on YouTube where you had audio engineers that further clarified the audio. They can be found.
Okay, thank you.
What was there bad weather that evening? Because it's quite easy to bounce VHF signals around when there's bad weather.
I believe, I want to double check this. I wrote this essay a couple years ago, and I think I recall rechecking the weather and that it was a drizzly evening, but I don't remember. I would have to double check that.
So where I grew up at the bottom of the Pennines in the north of England, when you got a storm off the North Sea, if you retuned your TV, you could get TV from the Netherlands, which was always entertaining. Very black and white, no colour either.
Enough detail.
If you're in the loop in Chicago with the amount of tall buildings there, 1,000 feet, etc., it might be easier to, therefore, for anybody wanting to interrupt, to bounce signals around because somebody calculated they could do it off buildings. With a flash light.
Or are you on the night?
Yes, you know an awful lot of information, don't you?
Yes.
I'm having some difficulty also hearing as people are talking. The general belief is that it was the microwave uplink. It should be noted that most television studios in Chicago, particularly at that time, were down in the loop. They were not so far away. There were two stations of significance, a WGN and WTTW, that were far away. Their studios were very separate from the transmitters downtown. I should also know that WGN eventually did move its transmitter from the John Hancock building up to the Sears Tower.
That's a shame. It's a bar.
It doesn't look right, doesn't it?
One other thing I did want to mention, the curious thing for a lot of us in Chicago is if you ever go to a bar, for example, and mention this, which I recommend that you not do, but you will probably meet up with several people who will tell you about a cousin's best friend who was the perpetrator. They will never refer to somebody who actually says that they were the perpetrator. It's always several degrees of separation, which I find really curious in a city with a culture of storytelling. When Chicagoans get together, we just tell stories. We go back and forth with memories and that sort of thing. And the fact that this story has not come out, and it's going on 40 years now, is pretty remarkable. So again, it leads me to believe that this was very small between Max and his lady, and that other people were not involved, and that they had very, very good reason to keep their mouths shut all these years.
Yeah. Lainie, has there been any copycat incidents of it? Has anybody tried to do the same thing?
The funny thing was, a rival network, a sportscaster on a rival network, a few days later faked his own copycat incident, both to mock WGN and WTTW and also the FCC. And there have been, I think, some attempts, but they really did lock down their security. That it was nothing to this scale, certainly not in this kind of a market. Now, curiously, there had been a couple of broadcast intrusions that Dr. Marcus of the FCC had solved, but they were primarily text-based. There was one where a broadcast engineer was angry about the fact that HBO subscriptions had gone up to $12.95 a month, and had put some text on a TV station complaining about this. This was called the Captain Midnight intrusion. And then there was a broadcast engineer from the Evangelical Christian Broadcasting Network that had basically interfered, I want to say, a porn channel or a semi-porn channel with calls to repent and turn to Christ. And he had solved those. He had solved those. And, he thought he could do it again. But for the reasons which I strongly believe that this was just collusion that combined with the convenient death of the mayor that let everybody just kind of tamp it down. We're going to address this privately, not encourage others, and be on with our business.
Very good. Any more questions? Or so I think another round of thanks. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much.
I do apologize for the interruptions. Unfortunately, I was talking and could not follow what was going on at the same time, but I was checked that and we got that taken care of. But I do apologize for that.
No problem at all. No problem at all. Lovely to thank you. Thank you again for presenting.
All right. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Should we take it? All right. Bye-bye.
Ah.